Hi friends, my name is Caitlin and I am a nonfiction lover but self-help hater, and today I'm going to talk about why that is. I found myself in the world of self-help almost by accident. I used to be a high school English teacher, and after 6 years of teaching, I was not doing well mentally, and so I decided to try a new career, being self-employed as a writer and photographer. And while I was in a much better place at the time, I did feel this pressure of needing to be successful and doing my best at all times, right? It was definitely the era of the girl boss mentality was strong, and I was the prey of it. So I listened to every podcast, I read every book, I read every blog post, I even took some webinars, and nothing was working. And I was trying so hard and I couldn't figure out why. And it really didn't hit me what was wrong until I read Girl Wash Your Face by Rachel Hollis. And then all of a sudden it became glaringly obvious what was wrong. Everyone in my circle was reading it at the time, loving it, and I picked it up and I was like, oh, this is a problem. It was a book that was an abundance of privilege and centered around advice for the privileged. And then all of it clicked for me. The self-help industry is not actually meant to help anyone, and it's actually designed to prey off of vulnerable people. Let's look at the numbers real quick, because the numbers tell a very clear story. So the self-help industry was a $43.7 billion industry in 2022. And of course, the self-help industry has always been a prominent and growing industry, but the way that it has grown in the last decade cannot be ignored. In fact, the compound annual growth rate is expected to be 5.1% over the next few years. And wow, these numbers might seem impressive, but I think they really tell a sinister truth. We saw one of the biggest growths in self-help in the year 2020, and I don't need to remind you what happened in 2020. In that year alone, there were over 45,000 new self-help books published, and over 71,000 life coaches filled the internet. Industries like the self-help industry grew in 2020 because they were preying off of people who were vulnerable during those times. So many people were desperate for help because real help wasn't being given to them. We see this in the multi-level marketing industry as well in 2020. It grew by nearly 13%. Distributors of MLMs flocked to social media in 2020, promising people who were laid off of work, who weren't able to go into work, a chance at earning an income. And instead of actually reaching success in MLMs, 99% of people who join MLMs do not succeed, do not make any money, and more often than not go into debt because they were promised success. And again, we saw the self-help industry work in a similar way during this time. We had a lot of life coaches and gurus and coaches who rushed to social media in the hopes of promoting their latest book, their course, their mastermind for people who were desperately looking for help. At best, during those times, people purchased a book, read a book that told them to think positively. At the very worst, people would spend $100,000 on a mastermind course promising to change their life and giving them absolutely nothing. And other numbers we need to look at is, who is this industry targeting? And the answer is that 70% of self-help consumers are women. The self-help industry sees profit in predatory marketing and disguises it as empowerment. The self-help industry tells women that they can have it all if they just believe in themselves more, without taking any real steps in achieving systemic change. The marketing is a lie, and the self-help industry knows it. And here's the thing about any industry: in order for the industry to be successful, you have to have repeat customers. About 85% of personal development courses are repeat customers. And of course, gurus and coaches and the self-help industry as a whole will have you believe that these repeat customers exist because they're loyal and they're gaining something from these courses. But I'm gonna argue something else. Let's think about a typical situation in self-help. An individual needs help, they go out to seek it, and they land on some self-help course or book. Whatever they're consuming, the self-help industry will give them empty platitudes that sound nice and inspiring and empower them. They might give them a couple of tricks to try here and there, and people will do them and try them, but nothing will change. So then they go to the next book, the next course, to do a couple things that are told to them then. Still, nothing changes. So they are told to purchase a mastermind, to invest in themselves, to spend more and more money, and still nothing changes. But they're so desperate for things to change, and they're promised that things will change, and they are told time and time again that they can be the difference, that they themselves can change their life. Again, this is a very promising thought. However, the sinister side of that is when things don't end up well, and when things aren't working out as the way they're promised, the individual blames themselves, because of course it is up to them to make the difference, when in reality, it is the fault of the systems that they're stuck in, and the self-help courses, books that aren't giving them anything. This idea that only I can help myself, again, sounds very empowering, but then it forces people into a position where helping themselves is their only option. There are no systems set in place to help one another or each other. This design, including the self-help industry, helps keep the rich rich because they are profiting off of your need, and it keeps the poor poor. It's entirely intentional. We live in a world where your opportunity is based off of where you were born, how much money you were born into, race, gender, abilities. All of these factors determine your access to education, professional opportunities, healthcare, housing, food, water, safety. And while it may sound empowering to tell you that you can change your access to these things, it is more often than not the reality of the situation. In order to increase our access to these inherent rights, we need to look beyond ourselves. But this is the opposite of all self-help messaging. And I think this is really dangerous. And here's the saddest part of it all. The self-help industry is so close to actually being helpful. Another reason why people are repeat customers within the self-help industry, on top of not actually getting the help that they need, so they keep looking for it, is that they find communities within the self-help world. A lot of life coaches, masterminds create communities of their clients, and unfortunately, they use cult-like manipulation tactics to get people in and stay in. And they actually use these communities as a tool of shame that's disguised as accountability. And they're designed in a way of peer pressure, essentially, to help encourage people to keep investing in themselves and purchasing their courses, books, etc. And in the past, we've literally seen some of these communities be incredibly harmful in cases such as Nexium and Scientology. Both of these cults, which started as self-development courses. And the self-help industry is so close because the answer to the problems that we're having is actually in community. The root of these problems don't lie within an individual mindset. They lie within the suppressive inequality that is built within our governments. What could help people become more happy and more successful, whatever that means, is access to quality healthcare, mental health care, education, affordable housing, and the elimination of systems rooted in colonialism and white supremacy. These are the things we need to change, not our mindsets. Mindsets promoted by the self-help industry encourage alienation and disempowerment. And people are only entirely focused on changing themselves. They're not focused on community or helping one another. And again, this is entirely intentional because this modeling keeps the self-help industry and the government in business. And I guess the question remains, what can we actually do about it? I was first introduced in the world of self-help because I was looking for resources on how to live with mental illness as well as becoming successful. And most people turn to self-help because they desperately need help. They're not able to find it, and so they're looking for resources they can't actually access. The need for self-help is there. What we need to do is eliminate the need. And the truth is, again, that things can only change if we work together as a collective. Collective help and creating community can not only help answer the problems and the issues that we're having now, but can empower us on a much larger scale to take on systemic issues. Let's go back to the numbers real quick because I want us to think about a better world. As I said before, the self-help industry is expected to grow very rapidly in the next 10 years. It's expected to be an $81.6 billion industry by 2032. Now, I'm not very good at math. I was an English major, but I want us to do some math here. Looking at the numbers, doing some calculations, I think it's safe to say that within the United States alone, the self-help industry is worth $20 billion today. What else can we be using this $20 billion for? Well, it would actually only take $23 billion to end world hunger as a whole. And then it's actually free. We don't even need to worry about the $20 billion to change policies in housing, employment, racism, sexism. And actually in the US, it would actually save the government $450 billion a year to give everyone access to free mental and physical health care. So the reality is that we can actually solve the root to the majority of our individual problems, including food scarcity, housing inequality, racism, sexism, healthcare, for a fraction of the cost that we're giving to the self-help industry every single year. But of course, obviously self-help leaders are not informing you of this. They need to keep feeding you the lie that you need to keep focusing on yourself, ignore any outside influence. Because if they actually told the truth, they wouldn't make any money. And so I think it's time to stop believing this narrative. And that's kind of what I want to do with my channel. I do a lot of deep dives on popular self-help books over on my Substack and my TikTok, where I look at the messaging in those books, say why they're harmful, and what we can do instead. And I want to continue doing that here on more long-form content. So if you're interested in following along on this, give me a like, comment, let me know what books you want me to deep dive on. And in the meantime, obviously I don't support the self-help industry as a whole, but I do recognize the need for it, right? We need free resources that we don't have access to actually help us. So I do actually have a list of self-help books that I do recommend for people to read if they do want to read self-help books, if they need that resources, and that can be found in the description below.